words on that interpretation. I know precisely what I had in mind when we wrote that. And God bless her, Congressman Carrie Meeks, former Congresswoman Carrie Meeks, put that language verbatim. She did not change a dot, she did not change a comma, she put it in verbatim just as we wrote it. So if you need an interpretation of what was intended and what was meant by that statute, come see us. I brought some copies of it here. I'm going to leave them with her. And just to lead off, and I'm not going to be here long, so don't get uncomfortable, because in about 2 hours I'll be through. You know, it is important for us to appreciate and understand what this means. We had quite a battle to get the language included. And I don't want to disparage anyone or any organization that's engaged in this magnificent effort to make certain we preserve God's creation as intact as is possible. But when we first mentioned, we recognized that there was an opportunity to get language into the Word Act that would address the disparities, economic disparities, social disparities that were being, if not created, exacerbated by the Everglades Restoration Project. One of my classic beliefs is that when you dig a hole in the ground, you affect everything above the ground. You can't just dig a hole and walk away and think nothing happened. You affect how people have to get around the hole, what goes in the hole. And I'm not oversimplifying the tremendous work that the Army Corps of Engineers do in helping our environment and improving things. But the fact of the matter is they only look at one side of the equation, and that is the technical side of the equation. And when you're dealing with land and land issues, the people are as important as the technology. One of the problems we had, and I digress, in getting this language into the Word Act was the opposition from the conservation community. Now, that community means well, and when I say the conservation community, that includes the organization I now work for, the Wilderness Society, and that includes the Audubon Society, that includes the Sierra Club, that includes the Nature Conservancy, the whole smear, the whole ball of wax. They were extremely concerned that if we press to have included in it what I call the Equal Protection Clause, if we press to have that included in it, that there would be congressional objections that would kill the bill. Stuart Strahl, who I admired dearly, was the head of the Everglades Conservation Office at that time. We had some spirited discussions about that. And to his credit, he relented. But that just is an example of the kind of dichotomy we get when we are looking at a landscape from different perspectives. I think they genuinely saw the passage of the act and the money that it would generate as ultimately, eventually being beneficial. That is one of the problems we've always had in this country when it comes to addressing to the needs of the least of us. And that is, you can wait. That there is something more important. You can wait. It's akin to the trickle-down theory, that we're going to do enough over here, and it's going to be so big and so wonderful, and it's going to help so many people. Eventually, it will help you. Except that in the affairs of men, there's always things known as selfishness, greed, mine versus yours, and somehow it doesn't trickle down to our benefit. I was actually stunned when I got an email from the gentleman who is the editor of our magazine. He sent me an email and said, you'll be interested in this. And it was a piece in Scientific American about the Audubon Society's a new push for inclusiveness in terms of the Everglades restoration. It's an article, nice article, you should read it. And I remember the conversations I had with John Flicker, who's now the president. That's a nice name for the president of the Audubon Society. Flicker, John Flicker, the bird flicker. John and I had conversation. Now we're talking 12, 13, 14 years ago. And now all of a sudden, 14 years later, the big deal about inclusiveness. I worked in his shop trying to work on inclusiveness. Now, let me tell you what has changed. The landscape, the demographic shift has changed. 2050, we 50-50. Okay? What we're talking about is all of the conservation community is coming to the realization that all of this change you're bringing about, all you're seeking to do, it's not going to happen if you have not brought into the tent those people who will be making the decisions about how this land will be used. And so now they are finally getting it, that they have to include Latinos, African Americans, and others who have not been part of the process. And I applaud them for that. But we have to hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they are sincere and that this is just not another opportunity to try and build a constituency about their concerns. Instead, it has to become our concern. And by our, I mean in the broader sense of the word. Now, one of the things that is holding much of this back is this whole thing in America I like to call otherness. Otherness. Don't ask me what it means. It's just something rattling around in my brain. But I can give you some examples. Black and white. That is either one or the other. And the people outside of that are other. And if they're other, they're different. And if they're different, they don't process like we do. And therefore, they don't have the same value. This whole concept of otherness based on color, race, class, education, gender, etc. Otherness. And that is something that we are going to have to deal with. We're not going to be able to deal with these problems of the environment, climate change, the economics, until we really grapple with this concept of otherness. And let me tell you something about it. You have to investigate how you feel about people who do not look like you. I have to do that. I have a constant struggle out of my experiences growing up as a boy and in the civil rights struggle. I have to constantly investigate, how do I feel about others? It doesn't just automatically happen, because if you don't get serious about investigating your feelings, I will guarantee you, you will act on the stereotypes that you grew up with. That is what you default to, automatically. And you think, I'm not a racist. I don't have anything against white people. I don't have anything against Indian, blue people, green people. Yeah, if you haven't thought about it, I guarantee you've got something against them, because you're programmed that way. You're programmed that way to deal with otherness. Tribalism is otherness. Okay? Another part of otherness is the conservation community versus the EJ community. This drives me absolutely crazy, because those two communities are opposite sides of the same coin. There's no conflict. And yet there is a divide between them. That line is as hard as any you'll find. There's absolute resentment. Now, I understand on the part of the EJ community, having worked there, I can understand that. The old saw was, and has been from time to time, the conservationists care more about birds, bees, deer, rabbits than they do about people. In a real sense, you can't care about the habitat and not care about people. Protecting the habitat will protect people. There's no question about that. On the other hand, it is amazing to me that you can talk about and have such deep passion for the habitat and not understand that there are real problems that people have that live within miles or within that habitat you're trying to protect. So both sides are not giving enough credit to the other side, and then finding out ways that we can work together. One of the most cherished memories I have of working in South Florida was working with Leola McCoy. Leola and I went way back many years. We were good friends. But Leola absolutely resented the fact that I worked for the Audubon Society, and when we were working with them, and I was working with the conservationists who did not care about the issues. And I love Leola, and I went to Bass Village meetings every Wednesday night for over a year, saying, I don't care what you think about me, Leola. I'm here to help, and there's a way I can help, because I don't see these communities as divided forever. And I'm working with Audubon, and I'm going to try and make them responsible. And one Sunday morning, I got a call from Leola, paid off, saying, Frank, do you think you can get those darn conservationists to sign a letter of support for us at Bass Village? And I said, Leola, I'll do that. I called Al. Al and I went and set up a meeting, and we said to them, look, guys, if you're talking about Everglades protection, blah, 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 then you have to sign this letter supporting the position of the Bass Village group in Fort Lauderdale. So we have to find ways to come together. And, lastly, this men, women. Oh, okay, yeah, that's a wonderful divide there that I really respect and I like. But there's a way that men and women process differently. And I'm really just, after all these years, I'm really about to get it, I think. I think I'm about to get it. And one of them is, as men, we approach problem solving linear. That is, here's X, here's 1, we know 3 is there, and we want to go right for 3. And if you put anything in the way, we'll say, yeah, but. What I'm beginning to love about women, they'll say, yeah, and. Big difference. Big difference. Women see a much wider horizon than men do. And I like to think that it's really spawned by physiological difference. That is, there is so much going on in a woman's body. For instance, she can, play a piano, sing at the same time, and at the same time is manufacturing the baby. Her body's tracking the stars and the moon. So she sees a much bigger world than we do. And it may be that they also see a much bigger world because when we were first in the trees, they were up in the trees looking out of it, and we were down there running from the lions and tigers and things trying to get supper. So we had to be very focused on what we were doing. We didn't have time for the broad vision, Anyway, but again, part of that otherness is beginning to try to appreciate, to get rid of that, the perspective of the other person. The other point I want to address is 2 other points. One is technical versus adaptive and transparency, and then I'll sit down. I was at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard a year ago, and one of the things that we were grappling with, how do we address the major problems that face in the 21st century? And this was a group of people from about 17 countries, and various government officials, etc. And one of my takeaways was this whole idea of technical versus adaptive. But what it brought back to mind that most ideas are not that new. They're really old. They get dressed up in new language and in the current language, but it's an old idea. And by technical versus adaptive, we're talking about 90% of the world's problems are technical. That is, you either have an answer or you have a process by which you can reach an answer. Those are easy. They're easy. It may take a long time. Polio took a long time, but we knew a process by which we could get the answer. The most intractable problems are adaptive. Those are the problems that say you must change the way you think and act. Now, boy, it's only 10% of the problem that we face, but boy, those are tough. An example. You might say the May 17th 1954 Supreme Court decision on segregated